What's happening, my capital trailblazers? Welcome back to another episode of the Do.Different.Better Show, where we talk about wealth, wisdom, and money moves, making finance simple for everyday people. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen, CEO and founder of Social Impact Now, Connective Institute, and managing director of the Integrated Capital Fund. Today, we're diving into the murky world of startup funding, specifically angel investors and venture capital. Understanding the world of angel investors and venture capital can be very daunting and overwhelming. And navigating the funding world, especially right now, can really feel like a confusing maze. But it's a really critical step for founders looking to scale their startups or their emerging business. But don't worry, I have got your back. In this episode, we'll break down the fundamentals of securing investment, how to build meaningful relationships with investors, and some strategies to stay true to your vision while leveraging external funding. Whether you're a first-time founder or a seasoned entrepreneur, this episode will provide you with some actionable insights to help you navigate the funding landscape like a pro. So let's get into it. Finding which funding option might be right for you can be really, really difficult. You probably have heard some of these words thrown around like Series A, Series B, seed funding, angel investing. But let's really face the facts. Finding the right investor is like finding the right life partner. The capital and the investor have to align with your goals, values, and dreams to make it the optimal fit and more sustainable relationship, whether it be whether on the financial side or on the personal side. You're actually sort of getting into bed with this person. And so really wanting to know that there's a really good fit and alignment around your vision for the company and just personality wise, and whether or not there's something that more that this person has to offer. Here's a fun fact. Did you know that less than 2% of startups even secure venture capital? But angels investors, they invest tens of thousands of dollars into businesses, particularly local businesses, every year. That's right. The pool is bigger than you think. So let's explore how you can make a splash. Let's start with the basics. First up, we're going to talk about kind of two ends of the spectrum. We're really going to be focusing in on angel investors, which is on the one side of the capital spectrum, and venture capital, which is really on the far end. There's lots of things in between, and I have some shows that I've covered that, so you can go back and listen to those. But for today's episode, I'm really going to talk about the two extremes, which is angel funding and venture capital. First up, angel investors. Angel investors are individuals who use their personal funds to invest in startup companies. And we're using the word startup. Usually startup typically relates to a tech business, but it can also be a existing business that may have been around for a while that's really looking to grow and expand, whether that's in geography, customer base, or productization. Think of the angel investors as your fairy godparent. You know, that's kind of what they're kind of doing for you. They often come in at the very early stages of your business when you need capital to develop your product or scale your operations. So here's the deal. When angel investors invest, they're typically asking for equity in your company, meaning they're going to get a small piece of ownership stake in exchange for what they're providing in capital. What makes angels unique is that they're often motivated by more than just profit. They genuinely often believe in your mission, believe in your vision, and even more so believe in you as a founder. Maybe they were a customer. I've talked about that on previous episodes. A lot of times people get their first angel investment from people who had been longtime customers, right? Here's a pro tip. Angel investors are often former entrepreneurs themselves and industry veterans. So they might also bring mentorship or a particular skill set that's really valuable, particularly connections that they can bring to the relationship. And that is the value for the equity that you might be giving up in the company. Now let's talk venture capital, also known as VC. Sometimes you'll hear PE, which are private equity firms that do venture investments, but typically venture capital firms are a beast of their own. They're usually part of a firm that manages pooled funds from other institutions like a pension fund or wealthy individuals or corporations. VCs typically invest in high growth startups that have already shown some traction. Think revenue growth, a solid customer base, or a disruptive product that's ready to scale. So when you think about a disruptive product, you could think about something like PayPal or even Venmo, right? These are things that change the game and how people exchange money for goods, services, and even a meal, right? When you're splitting the bill, you can actually say, "Hey, everybody, just Venmo me." I do this with my tennis group. I belong to a tennis league, and whenever we have to do court fees, one person will pay, and we Venmo. Just think about how that transformed how much cash you carry in your wallet. Many people don't even carry cash, and I singularly believe that Venmo and PayPal made a large influence on that consumer behavior change of people carrying around cash. You didn't need to if you could electronically transfer funds from one person to another seamlessly within less than 60 seconds, right? But unlike angel investors, venture capital firms come with more structure and more stringent terms. They're focused on generating significant returns for their investors, not necessarily just your investors that you've brought to the table already in your business. So their approach is going to be a lot more aggressive, not only in how they talk to you about managing the organization, but also when and how they get paid their dividends. However, on the other side of it, their checks are often much larger. They come with strings attached, like they ask for seats on your board of directors. They might have some critical milestones that they want you to reach before they invest any additional capital. They may also hit some performance metrics. So they may give you a small amount of capital, and as you hit different benchmarks, start to release more capital, right? So when we talk about, and so I'm going to get into both of these really more in depth in this episode, but I want to at least start you off with a general understanding of like, what is a VC, which is typically an organization, right? Once again, that manages a pool of funds from a group of investors. Those investors may be institutions or wealthy individuals, versus an angel investor, which is an individual that is actually putting their own money into your business. So one quick way to know the difference if somebody calls themselves an angel investor or calls themselves a VC is angels write personal checks, VCs write institutional checks. Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the players and weigh the pros and cons of each. One of the biggest advantages of angel investors is flexibility. Since they're investing their own money, they often have fewer bureaucratic hoops that you have to jump through. Plus, they're far more willing to bet on you as a person or even your startup that doesn't have a proven track record, right? Once again, they're betting on you, the human who they know, like, or they like your product and they see the potential and the opportunity of your product or service. Here's the downside. Angels usually invest smaller amounts of money. It could be anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 to 20,000 to 30,000. Typically, an angel investor, more often than not, is not investing or writing a check for larger than $100,000. That's not to say that that doesn't happen, but typically the checks that I see for angel investors is somewhere between, I'd say, $10,000 and $75,000. So if your startup needs a massive capital injection, angels may not be the best route to go because you'll have to get so many angel investors to get to that larger number that you're trying to get. If you're trying to raise $500,000, 2 million, 5 million, going around and getting a whole bunch of angel investors may not be the best use of your time. And quite frankly, it's exhausting because then you have to continually manage and inform and be in contact with all those investors, as opposed to a VC firm that has a whole team and you'll just be dealing directly with that one person or a couple of people at that firm. So on the flip side, venture capital, they bring very large dollars amounts. If you're looking for millions to scale rapidly, maybe you need to expand in multiple cities at the same time or build a state-of-the-art product, or you need some very specific technology or equipment to mass produce. VCs can help you make that happen. But once again, here's the catch. Along with those large checks come very large expectations. VCs are focused on growth at all costs, which means you might feel pressured to scale faster than you're comfortable with. And remember those board seats? They often come with a say in how you run your company, right? That's your board. So, which one is better? It really depends on your goals and it depends on where your business is at this moment. If you're looking for early support and mentorship, angels might be the best bet. If you're ready to scale big and fast, venture capital could be the right fit. I'm going to take a pause. My contractor's here really quick, so give me a hot second.
Okay, you're good to go. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead whenever you're ready. That actually make it easy.
Okay.
I use my cut when I hear my voice in here. All right.
Okay.
Ready when you are. Yep.
So when you choose an angel investor, so when should you choose an angel investor and when you should go for venture capital? We'll talk about it. If you're in the early stages of your startup, maybe year 0 to year 3, maybe you're still developing the product or just getting your first customers, angel investors is really a great option for you. They'll help you bridge the gap between idea and execution without the same level of pressure to scale so quickly. If your business is already generating revenue, has significant traction, venture capital might make sense. VCs are looking for high growth. So if you're ready to scale rapidly and disrupt the market, now's the time to start pitching to them. I often say to founders, don't pitch when you need money. Start looking for money before you actually need it, right? Because that time span is not short, right? When you think about, you've got to find the VC or you've got to find the angel investor, you got to meet with them, you got to see if you like them, you need to vet them. They're going to be vetting you. You should also be vetting them. Remember, you're going to be in a relationship with this person for a long while. So making sure that it is symbiotic, that you enjoy talking to one another, or at the very least, if you don't like the person, that there's actually something concrete that you're getting from them, whether it's connections, whether it's expertise, that might be more valuable than you actually liking them, right? So here is your homework for my startup stars. Research investors in your industry. Look up angel networks like Golden Seeds. Locally, we have Go for Angels. These Go for Golden Seeds. They focus on women-led startups. We have a couple of other ones. Sophia Fund here in Minnesota. They focus on healthcare based on biotech businesses that are led by women. Or you want to look at VC firms that specialize in your niche. No matter what kind of investor you're looking for, that should be part of your research. You need to be looking at what kind of things do they invest in. And if you don't know at your first meeting, that's probably after introducing yourself, that's probably the first question you should ask is, what have you invested in the past? What are you interested in investing in the future? Is it an industry specific? Do you bring a set of expertise? These are all really good questions because then you can start to think about, might this be a good match, instead of spending a whole lot of time with somebody who's really not interested in your particular sector or your particular growth plan of the business, right? But don't forget, finding the right investor is more than just about the money. It's about finding somebody who really believes in your vision and is going to support you and can help you take it to the next level. Let's say you're a more creative person and you need somebody who's really good at holding you accountable. And so they're willing to meet with you every month to see that you're on track. That has a value that money can't buy. So really thinking about, what are your skills and competencies? What are the holes in the business? What are the holes in your leadership? And trying to find an investor, whether that's an angel or a VC, that's really going to support you and either getting you the resources that you need to close that gap, or going to be able to help you step in and provide some of that knowledge and expertise for you to do that. Okay. So that's it for segment one. You're listening to Do Different Better. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen. And in the next segment, we're going to talk about how to craft a killer pitch to secure your funding, right? So I'll see you back after the break. Stay tuned. All right, my entrepreneur trailblazers, welcome back to the Do Different Better show. In segment one, we talked about knowing your investors, angels versus VCs. Now, in this segment, we're going to talk about where the magic happens, and that is crafting a pitch that seals the deal. I know pitching can feel like high stakes Shark Tank moment, but don't sweat it. We're going to break it down into bite-sized pieces so that you can walk into that meeting and just wow the people that you are presenting in front of, right? Here's another fun fact. Did you know investors typically make up their mind about you in the first 5 minutes of your pitch? That's why nailing your opening is non-negotiable. So let's get into it. And I think it's really important to remember you won't always have a screen to do your pitch deck. Sometimes you're just going to have to present your pitch off the dome, right? So once again, you really want to practice this, and you really want to know what are your key talking points, right? Because you're not always going to have your slideshow or your slide deck with you when you present. But first, let's get into the mechanics. We're going to talk about the anatomy of the pitch. A great pitch is like a great story. It has a hook. It hooks your audience. It keeps them engaged, and it leaves them wanting more. So here's a formula that I have found a lot of success with. First is your problem or solution statement. You're going to start by laying out the problem you're solving in a way that's relatable and easy to understand. That can be difficult when you're talking about something like biotechnology or something a little bit more complicated. But typically, if you're pitching a VC or even an angel investor that specifically invests in those kinds of companies, they're going to have that knowledge. So, but I'm always cognizant of jargon, right? If you can keep out as much jargon as possible, it makes you a lot more relatable and makes people feel like, oh, you can tell this story to anybody, not just people who come from the field, right? So you want to start by laying out the problem in a way that's easy to understand. Then you're going to hit them with the solution. What makes your product or service the ultimate game changer in the field, right? That warrants them making an investment in you. So let's say you're pitching a meal delivery service that reduces food waste. You could say something like, every year, 108 billion pounds of food go to waste in the United States. That's enough to fill the Rose Bowl every single day. Our app connects restaurants with surplus food to local consumers at a discount, solving food waste and saving money. Boom, clear and compelling. Next up, we're going to talk about market opportunity. Investors want to know, how big of the pie are you going after? And is it realistic? Showcase the size and scalability of your market. I cannot tell you how many times I talk to founders and I ask them, what is the total sizable market? Like, if you were to be able to sell to every single business, every single human that is interested in this thing, how many people would that be? What would that number represent? And there's ways for you to find that out. There's research. I definitely, once again, I've said this in previous episodes, use your research librarian. These are the things that they can research for you. There are industry reports that give you an understanding of your market and will tell you the answer to that question. So you need to use real data, like the food delivery industry is projected to grow by 10% annually and reach $200 billion by 2030. With just a 5% market share, will generate $10 billion in revenue, right? That's how you want to tell that story. And once again, your research librarian at your local library or at your local university library can help you find that information out. That's what they do. That's what they're there for. Then you want to talk about there's traction. So you want to highlight your wins, any wins. I think sometimes founders underestimate the wins that are valuable for somebody to hear. One time somebody asked me about, going to college, and they didn't think really was, a good idea. And I said, everybody who goes to college, very few people say, oh, college was great and amazing, and I loved every single minute of it. Employers want to see that you went to college because were you able to successfully complete something knowing that college is bumpy, right? And that you stuck with it and you got a degree, a 2-year or 4-year degree or terminal degree, and you stuck through it through all the difficult times. That's what an employer is looking for. Well, an investor is no different. They're trying to see that despite all of the odds, and there are a lot of odds, particularly if you're a woman, particularly if you come from a rural community, and particularly if you're a person of color or a person with a disability, and that you've been able to overcome and make some movement, because most people would stay at home in bed, right? So the fact that you were able to go out and get your first customer within 30 days of launching, those are things that are really valuable and important. So don't underestimate the things that you've accomplished. If you're not sure which ones you should talk about, make a list and talk to about 10 friends and say, if you were going to invest in me, which one of these things would impress you, right? I think that's a simple, easy way to kind of get outside of your head and be able to get some really good objective feedback. But you want to highlight your wins. You want to talk about the milestones that you've hit. You want to talk about the customers you've acquired. Hey, were you able to close a grocery store in 2 meetings? That's a great thing, right? You want to talk about revenue growth. You want to talk about the partnerships that you've been able to develop. But once again, even the small victories show momentum and credibility. It demonstrates your tenacity, it demonstrates your persistence, and it demonstrates a level of consistency in how you work, which is going to give them confidence that you will demonstrate that throughout growing the business. And then finally, there's projections. Investors know that these are estimates. Oftentimes, when I work with founders on building their projections, they're like, but this feels like I'm making it up. Well, you kind of are making it up, but you're making it up with some sense of logic. It's not that you're going to say, it's one thing to say, hey, I'm a solopreneur. I'm starting this business on day one. And by next year, I'm going to be producing 100,000 units. Okay. I don't know if that's true or not, but my next question to you is going to be, what are the things that need to be put in place to make that happen? Right. And if you can answer that question for me, then I'm like, okay, 100,000 units and which correlates to $300,000. Okay, I can see where that is plausible, right? They're looking for what's plausible. So while yes, projections are made up numbers, they are based on some sort of sense of reality of what your capabilities are, how quickly you can mobilize other resources to be able to meet the numbers that you put in your projections. If you said, hey, I'm going to grow to 500,000 units in production, and you have no startup capital, you have no lines of credit, you have no relationships with banks, you have no place to produce them, I'm going to question your ability. And unless you can come back to me and explain to me thoughtfully, this is what it's going to take to get there over the next 12 months. This is how I'm going to increase my production. And these are the sales milestones that we're going to make. And the reason I'm going to make these sales milestones is because I'm going to have my sister, my partner, my spouse work with me in the business part-time for free. They're an amazing salesperson. They work at a Fortune 500 company with being a salesperson. So I know that they're going to be able to close, and they're going to be able, they have a mechanism or benchmarks that they know that they're going to be able to hit to be able to get us to that 500,000 of units or 500,000 in dollars, right? So if you can explain to me how you're going to get there, I'm going to think about, does that make sense? And if it makes sense, then those are your projections, right? But the projections are estimates. but they want to see your ambition is grounded in some sort of scope of realism, right? So, and they're going to want to know, you're going to need to outline how you're going to use their capital and the return on investment they can expect. Even if that return on investment is zero, don't promise what you can't deliver, right? Now, you may not know that you can't deliver in that moment, but once again, you want to be grounded in some kind of reality of like, hey, you're not going to see any dividend or you're not going to see any return on investment for 5 years. And then I'm going to return your capital to you, or you're going to have 1% interest, like whatever it is, be as forthcoming as possible, because the truth is going to come out in the wash. And if you know something up front when you're making that offer, it's going to just bite you in the behind. So just if you know you're not going to return capital for 5 years, for 3 years, or you are not going to return any dividends for the first 5 years, just say that. It's not necessarily a no for an investor when you tell them something like that. If they've invested before, it's not going to be the first time that they've heard something like that. So you're not going to hurt their feelings, right? But the whole idea is that you're entering and engaging in a relationship that is based on good faith, right? So visuals are your best friend. So once again, if you have the opportunity to present a slide deck, visual graphic pictures, the saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words, that is definitely true. Using charts and graphs that show data is very, very impactful than a wall full of text. But once again, I do want you to remember, you may not always have the opportunity to have a deck with you. So you want to have something, you're going to need to have a couple of pitches in your pocket. You want that pitch that if there's no slide deck, how can you tell the story without overcomplicating the graphics and overcomplicating the data, but gets the point across that you are a viable business and you know what you're talking about, versus the pitch that has the beautiful graphics in it that tells a different story, where you can really either pull at people's heartstrings or activate people's right side, their right brain or their left brain, depending on what you want to activate for the pitch that you're doing. So here's my call to action. Download a pitch deck from a platform like DocSend or Canva and just start plugging in your information. You don't necessarily have to be the supersonic designer. There's so many apps out there that actually help you. I think Beautiful.ai helps with pitch decks. I think there's an organization called Brevity Pitch. I think they help with pitch decks. A lot of it is AI generated. So you can put in all of your information in a preset format, and it will turn it into some graphic representation. But once again, Canva is available. I think they have a free service that you can get in. So if you just want to tootle around with it, you can do that with very, very low investment, right? Just be careful. It's easy to go down a rabbit hole once you start, right? But keep it to 10 slides at max. You can have some ancillary or extra addendum slides if somebody asks you for some specific industry information or some specific information that goes into some details, but your presentation deck should be no more than 10 slides. And once again, you can have extra slides, but those slides are more of, hey, I want to go down more into the details and I want to know more. And people can peruse those on their own. So I would call those slides addenda or appendix, or more detail or more information. So people know, like, the slideshow is these 10 slides, right? So the thing, though, to remember is simplicity is really the key, right? You want to make it easy to understand. And even for those types of businesses that might be more complicated, because once again, you want to invite people to want more. They want to know more. So give them sizzle, not necessarily all the steak, right? So that was number one. And now let's talk about how to build relationships with investors, right? Pitching is really only half the battle. Building relationships with investors, no matter whether they're VCs or whether they are private equity firms or whether they're angels, can be a real game changer. And that can be really difficult, particularly if you're an introvert, particularly if you have ADHD. These are things that require consistent and persistent attention, right? Maybe the way your ADHD is set up, you're able to do that, whereas some people are not, right? I'm very much, my ADHD shows up of like I am consistent and almost narrow-minded and very singularly focused, as opposed to like to the disadvantage of everything else. While some people might be live on the other side of the spectrum of like they're doing a little bit of everything and they can never get anything to the finish line. So really, once again, you've got to really think about and take a real objective inventory of yourself as a founder, and not to feel bad about those things that maybe aren't your strengths or your superpowers, but how can you find either employees, advisors, peer mentors, or investors that are going to help compensate for those things that aren't necessarily your gifts? So, but let's get back to talking about building relationships with investors. First, you need to start by networking before you need funding. I talked about that earlier. I'll say it again. I'll probably repeat it a couple more times in this episode. But start attending local startup events, join an accelerator, attend pitch competitions, but not just to compete, but to connect. So, not just going to these pitch competitions for you to pitch, but going there to meet other people. You're going to meet potential investors, or you'll meet people who represent networks of investors. It's much easier to pitch to someone that who already knows and has some level of trust about you, right? So, how do you find the right investors? There are some platforms like Angel List or LinkedIn or Crunchbase, and you can research investors who funded companies in your particular industry. I would always start there because these are people who are going to know your industry. A lot of times when you hear these numbers around people who don't necessarily, or women getting 2% of venture capital investment, or women of color getting less than 0.8% of investment from venture capital. Some of that is that the investors don't understand what you've built because they don't understand the problem. Once again, when you think about when these new feminine hygiene product companies were coming out like Honey Pot, it was very difficult for them to start to get their early investments because people didn't understand the problem they were solving, particularly since many investors happen to be men. I'm glad to say that that trend is changing. But if you're a man, you may not understand the industry or the situation of what problem you're solving when it comes to your women's hygiene and women's reproductive health, right? So you're not even going to touch that investment because you're like, I don't know anything about it, or you don't value the solution that has been presented to you. We see this a lot in the hair care market of that investors not really understanding the whole curly hair market or textured hair market. So they don't invest in it. So having somebody who has an understanding or relationship to the problem that you're trying to solve with the business that you've created is going to be really, really the first place to start, I recommend. So, once again, for another example, if you're building a fintech app, don't pitch to someone who exclusively invests in healthcare. It's like trying to sell ice to a penguin. It's the wrong audience and wasted effort. And remember, I've told you as a business owner, while you may make a product or a service, you're in the business of selling your time. So what are you going to dedicate your time and energy to? Now, let's talk about the don'ts and the do's. First, do be authentic, right? Investors can spot canned speeches a mile away, right? So even if you need that canned speech, try to figure out ways that you can kind of soften it so it doesn't feel like you're a robot when you're repeating it, right? It's very conversational as opposed to presentational, right? Don't overpromise. I mentioned this a little bit before. Investors respect founders who are honest about their own limitations, but are also clear on how they plan to overcome them. So once again, if you've got peer mentors, or you're looking for investors to fill the holes, or you're building a board of directors or an advisory team that is going to help you with your blind spots, that's something that investors are going to respect and see that you are making good business decisions, right? You're doing things that are good for the business. They may feel uncomfortable for you, but you're doing something that's good for the business. Do follow up. I cannot tell you that that's where so much of this drops off is people just not following up or following through. A personalized thank you email after you have a meeting shows professionalism and keeps you top of mind because so many people don't do it. I even go through, I know this is passe. I know you're going to tell me, Elaine, you're an old lady, but a handwritten note, that is chef's kiss because so many people don't do it. If you want to be in the lasting memory of anyone, write a handwritten note. It doesn't have to be beautiful. You can say, listen, Elaine, I've got serial killer handwriting. That's okay. The fact that you took the time, they may not be able to read your scrawl, but the fact that you took the time to send them a handwritten note, I can just tell you, particularly anybody who over 40 is going to value that so much. Okay. And most investors are going to be over 40. So just want to say that. Investors often invest in people, not just ideas, and they invest in people that they like. So show your passion, show your resilience, and your commitment to making your vision a reality. Okay. The third thing I want you to think about is here are some mistakes to avoid. Now, let's talk about what not to do. These are the pitfalls that can derail even the best of pitches. First, lack of preparation. I cannot tell you how annoying it is to have somebody come in who clearly did not prepare. Maybe they stayed out all night the night before, and you can see that they have literally slept for 2 hours, right? They didn't practice. They're flubbing their words. They haven't really researched the industry. They're just going off of their own greatness. They've really drunk their own Kool-Aid of like, I'm just amazing and you should just give me money because I'm so amazing, or my parents are XYZ. That ain't going to cut it, right? And the other thing is you've got to know your numbers. I cannot stress this enough. You have got to know your revenue. You've got to know your profit margins. You've got to know the market size. That is so important. Rehearse your pitch and anticipate the tough questions. If you're using AI, put your pitch in and say, if you were a venture investor that was going to write a $50,000 check, what questions would you ask me? Right? It's not going to get all of them, but you're going to get some really good questions. Once again, if you have a friend who's an investor, you have a peer, have them review your deck and say, if you were going to put $100,000 into my company, what kinds of questions would you ask based off of this pitch? Right? There's so many different ways you can get really good feedback in advance of you going to that meeting. And once again, that shows you're prepared because you've anticipated some of these questions. You're not going to anticipate every question. And preparedness is not about knowing the answer to every single question. It's about that you confidently can answer the questions that you can answer and say, you know what? I can answer part of that question, but I'd love to have an opportunity to get back to you on the other half of that question, right? So, these are the things that you want to think about. Next, you want to don't ignore the investor's perspective. Always ask yourself, what's in it for them? Investors want to know the ROI, so highlight your business growth and how you're going to grow their wealth. Whether you like that or not, that is another reason why I like you, but I'm also investing because I'm trying to enrich myself, right? trying to enrich my wealth through some kind of mechanism. Now, different people are going to have different expectations of what that looks like. Some people might say, hey, if you're only paying me $100 dividend a year, that's fine. Some people, particularly when we talk about venture capital, they are looking at a 5, 10, 20, 30x return on their investment. So if you give them $100,000 and they're expecting a 10x return on investment, they're expecting to get $1 million at some point in time in the future. Right. I think the other thing that I didn't talk about a little bit is timeline, but I'll talk about that after I kind of get through these points that I want to make. So instead of saying, hey, we're going to change the world, say we're going to change the world and we're going to deliver a 3x return on investment within the next 5 years. That's what an investor wants to hear. Third, don't be overly sensitive or overly defensive when you're getting feedback. Feedback is like opinions. Everybody's got them. So what you've got to do, if you've got to do a really good job of distilling what is valuable. And I will just tell you, the thing that maybe feels the most prickly is probably the thing you need to pay the most attention to. You may not like it. You may not have liked the delivery. You may not have liked what was said. But if you feel like your heart beating, or you feel your palm sweating, or you feel like yourself getting a little bit of attitude, that's probably the thing you need to pay attention to, right? I had this with one of my founders. He was like, I really didn't like the way you said that to me. And I said, okay, I understand that. But what about my comment? Right? I understand you didn't like what I said, but what is the answer? Or what's your thought on what I brought to your attention? Right? And that person didn't have a response. I'm like, okay, then before you get mad at what I said and how I said it, come back and with an answer to what I brought to your attention, right? And then we can hash out, you didn't like what I said, but obviously there's a there, right? But here's how you can handle those situations, particularly in the moment. And this is also something you may need to rehearse. Hey, that's a really great point. Here's how I address that. Or, hey, that's a really good point. I've started talking about this with my peer mentor. I've started talking about this with my advisory board. We're still working on what's the best solution or the best way to approach that. What are your ideas that you have? What would you like to bring, right? So once again, get off the defensive and get onto the offensive, right? Or even neutral. Number 4, before we wrap up, I want to drop some resources to help you level up your pitch game, right? So there's some books called, there's one that's called Venture Deals by Brad Field. It is really the quintessential book to understanding how venture capital funding works. There's also Angel by Jeff Calacanis. It gives you some really great tips on pitching to angel investors, right? There's also a great book called Invest for Better by Janine Firpo, who's a really good friend of mine. Then there's some online platforms. I've mentioned them before. This is not sponsored. But there's Angel List, there's Crunchbase. There's also some ones, if you just go onto the internet and say angel investors, you can say Latino angel investors, Black angel investors, right? And you might be able to get just some general lists. They might be dated. So that's the thing you want to know. Some of this information is going to be dated on the internet. But once again, it's a great place to start. Again, go to your reference librarian, see if there's things that they can find for you around where to find some good list of angel investors or venture firms, right? So Gust is another great one. It is a platform that specifically connects startups with funding opportunities. There's Republic, so you can put your business onto the Republic platform, and actually investors go and look for businesses to invest in on that platform. So, but once again, here's a pro tip. Practice your pitch in front of trusted mentors or fellow entrepreneurs. They will give you honest feedback and help you refine your message. There's a great one called Million Cups. I think it's supported through the philanthropic gift of Kauffman Foundation. Many major metropolitan cities have them. They're usually the first Wednesday or every Wednesday of the month. You can just go and pitch. You sign up. You just go and pitch, and there'll be entrepreneurs there, there'll be investors there, there'll be ecosystem partners there, but it gives you that chance to just get a lot of at-bats with pitching and being able to field questions and getting through those nervous butterflies that you might get. You'll just become an animal when it comes to doing your pitch. So that wraps it up for this segment. My fearless founders, you've learned the anatomy of creating a winning pitch, how to build relationships with investors, and some common mistakes to avoid. In our next segment, we're going to talk about what happens after you secure the funding, how to make the most of your investor relationship, and set your business up for long-term success. You're listening to Do Different Better. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen. And stick around for the last segment and click the subscribe button. Welcome back, my bold and bright business builders. This is the final segment of today's Do Different Better show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen, and we're diving into the most critical and often overlooked aspect of securing funding, managing investor relationships while staying true to your vision. Okay, you've done the hard work, you found the investors, you crafted the pitch, and so you've secured the capital. Now comes even the harder part. Keeping those relationships productive while ensuring your business stays aligned with your goals. So let's get into it. let's first start setting the stage for what happens after you secure the funding. And if you really want to know more about the actual process of like negotiating with the investor and getting the money, I talk about due diligence in another episode. So go check out that episode. But now we're going to talk about after you've secured the funding. So investors can be more than just a bank account. They bring expertise and industry connections and mentorship to the table. Think of them as your business advisors. Lean on their insights to navigate challenges and seize opportunities. If you've ever partnered with a former tech founder who's now an angel investor, they might guide you on scaling your engineering team or refining your product roadmap, right? Now, understanding the difference between active and passive investors. Not all investors are created equal. Active investors want a seat at the table. They often ask to be on the board or be an advisor or meet with you on some sort of regular basis. They'll check in frequently, they'll share their opinions, and sometimes challenge your decisions. Once again, don't fall into the trap of being defensive. Listen to what they have to say and really think about it. I always like for myself, give myself 24 to 48 hours before I respond. Give yourself a chance to sleep on it, let it run through your body, run through your brain, and come back with a better sense of like how you want to think about or approach that person with what the feedback they've given you. Passive investors, on the other hand, provide funding and they really take a step back. A lot of times that happens with somebody who's not necessarily knows your industry or field. They're really investing in you. So they really may not feel like they have anything to offer except for their capital, or they may not have the capacity to support you in any other way than that capital. Maybe they travel a lot, they're in different time zones. My mentor, she lives in Australia. So I don't get to talk to her often, but when I do, it's deep and it's long and we get to it, right? So, but they are trusting you to execute on your vision. Here's a pro tip. Understand the level of involvement you want from your investors in advance. Do you need a hands-on mentor? Do you want somebody that's going to just let you work on your own? Communicate this during the negotiation or due diligence process to avoid any surprises later. When we have a conference that we do that's called the Connect Up Summit, in one of our sessions, we actually work through on the investors to identify what kind of businesses that they want to invest in. And we work and we do a workshop on the other side to work with entrepreneurs for them to identify what kind of investor they want, what kind of capital do they want, how much do they want, how engaged do they want the investor, et cetera, et cetera. So number 2, navigating conflicts and control. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, conflicts. Nobody likes conflict. When you invite investors into your business, you're also inviting their opinions, their priorities, and sometimes their demands. Here's how you can manage those dynamics. Set clear expectations from the onset. Create governance documents like a shareholder agreement that outline decision-making authority. Many investors are going to ask for that anyways, but you kind of need to know what you want to go into that document before it gets set. Sometimes if you're getting bank investment or you're getting investment from the Small Business Association and you have outside investors, they're going to want to see some kind of shareholder agreement that outlines how frequently you're going to talk, how frequently you're going to communicate what's going on in the business, whether it's through a newsletter every monthly or quarterly, or an email, a synopsis, or a board meeting, whatever that is, that's all going to be outlined. You're going to define the board structure. Who gets a seat at a table and what qualifies to be at a seat at the table, and what kind of power do they hold? That means voting rights. What kinds of things can they vote on? What kinds of things can't be voted on? How many votes each person has? Do you, as the founder, get 2 votes and they get 1? All of that gets outlined up front, and you talk about that. Finally, being transparent with the growth and timelines and the milestones, particularly if you know in advance that you're not going to be hitting those milestones, be prepared to talk about, we're not going to hit that milestone. Here's why we're not going to meet this milestone. And here's what I'm putting in place to help prevent us from not meeting future milestones, right? So before signing any deal, you're going to bring in an attorney who specializes in venture capital or angel investing to review the terms. A few hours of legal advice now can save you a world of stress later. Once again, that's all part of the due diligence process. And I encourage you to listen to that episode on what the due diligence process is. You definitely need a lawyer. You definitely need an accountant, right? So Investors can often push for rapid scaling and changes they believe will increase returns, but you must evaluate whether these moves align with your vision and, quite frankly, your capability, right? For example, a founder of a sustainable fashion brand once shared how her investors wanted her to outsource production to lower costs, but she refused because it would compromise the ethical sourcing, which was the core of her brand. Instead, she negotiated a slower growth timeline that kept her values intact. And sometimes, even when you negotiate something in front, you might need to renegotiate at some time in the future because things change. The external market changes, the business changes as it grows and scales. You may change your perspective on things. The board composition may influence change. So these are all things. So even though you may have negotiated something up front, you can always go back to the table and ask to renegotiate. That does not necessarily mean that they are going to be willing to negotiate, but you can always say, hey, this is what's happening. I think it's an opportunity for us to renegotiate terms based on the new reality that we're living in. They're not stupid. They see the new reality as well as you do. And if they are unwilling to renegotiate, if there's an opportunity to get them off the board by paying them off, by giving their investment back to them, that is also something that you can consider. If you feel pressure to pivot, gather the data and support your stance. Show why your approach aligns with the market trends and customer loyalty and long-term profitability. So, I really want you to think about how you're going to create a vision statement and share it with your team, because then that is your North Star, right? I know for us, we put our vision statement and our mission statement on every single document as much as possible, right? So we put it on the board meeting minutes. It's on our website. You'd be surprised how many companies do not put their vision and mission statement on their website. I think it's really important because it's a constant reminder to you, it's a constant reminder to your employees, and it is a constant reminder to anybody who comes to your website, particularly potential investors and current investors, on where you stand with your core values, your mission, and the direction that you're taking the company. So here are some practical and tactical takeaways. Okay, my startups, let's wrap this up with some actionable steps that you can take today to manage investor relationships and safeguard your vision. Action step number 1, draft a clear and concise vision statement. Share it with your team and incorporate it with your investor pitch, and be sure that everyone is aligned with that. Action step number 2, identify 3 investors or firms whose vision or whose values align with your mission. Research their portfolio companies, and reach out to see if you can get an introduction, right? Or get a meeting on the books. Action step number 3, schedule a meeting with your team and or advisors and review your growth strategy. Ensure that it aligns with your mission and identifies areas where investors' input might be helpful. This will really be really great to bring your team on board, even if it's just your co-founders, making sure regularly, and I would say at least once a year, of like, is this really what we want for this company? Is this really how we're going to plan to grow the company? These are the things that are still important to us, because once again, people change, the world changes, and those two things can maybe bring misalignment. So checking in at least once a year to be like, hey, make it a retreat. It's a business write-off. You guys go out of town, go have a staycation, be like, hey, we're going to dedicate the next 2 days of reviewing our pitch deck, reviewing our core values, reviewing our mission. Is this still on track? Does this still feel good to both of us or all of us if you've got multiple team members or stakeholders, right? And here is my final call to action. No matter where you are in your funding journey, remember this: you're the captain of the ship. Investors are here to provide wind beneath your sails. So chart your course and don't be afraid to navigate. Well, that's it for today's episode of Do Different Better. Today, we discussed the world of angel investors and venture capital. I know this can be daunting, but I want to thank you for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, share this episode with somebody you know. Share this episode with somebody you know. Really, let me know what you think of the show. We'd love comments. Tell us how the show helped you or a friend. You can follow me at Do Better with Elaine on Instagram and watch the show on YouTube at Do Different Better. Until next time, stay healthy, wealthy, and wise, and keep making money moves.